June 28, 1944. Saipan Island, Mariana Archipelago. Under the pale moonlight, Sergeant Marcus Jenkins crawled through dense underbrush, his dark skin blending perfectly with the night shadows. 500 yards ahead, Japanese soldiers huddled around a small fire, convinced the American advance had halted for the night. They believed themselves safe in the darkness, a fatal miscalculation they would soon regret. What these soldiers could not know was that the United States Marine Corps had deployed something entirely unexpected on this remote Pacific island. A specialized unit of African-American snipers trained specifically for nighttime operations. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how a segregated unit of black Marine marksmen would transform night fighting in the Pacific Theater, forcing Japanese commanders to fundamentally reconsider their notions about both their American adversaries and their own military doctrine, while simultaneously battling prejudice within their own ranks that nearly prevented their historic deployment altogether. The origins of this remarkable unit dated back to 1942, when Major General Thomas Holcomb, Commandant of the Marine Corps, had reluctantly begun accepting African-American recruits following an executive order from President Roosevelt. The Marine Corps, the most resistant of all military branches to integration, initially relegated these men to auxiliary units, the Montford Point Marines, named after their segregated training facility in North Carolina, separate from the white training grounds at Parris Island. Colonel James Anderson, however, saw an opportunity others missed. A career Marine with a reputation for unconventional thinking, Anderson had spent time studying night operations while stationed in the Philippines before the war. The Pacific Campaign presents unique challenges, Anderson wrote in a classified memorandum dated December 7, 1942. Japanese forces operate effectively in darkness and difficult terrain. We must develop specialized units capable of meeting and defeating the enemy on equal terms under any conditions. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Williams, reviewing the proposal, scoffed. Anderson's ideas are impractical and unnecessary. Our current training protocols are more than adequate for Pacific operations. This sentiment echoed throughout much of Marine Corps leadership, comfortable with traditional tactics and resistant to innovation, particularly innovation that involved African-American Marines in combat roles. But Anderson persisted, assembling data from early island engagements that showed alarming casualty rates during Japanese night infiltration attacks. After Guadalcanal, where American forces suffered significant losses to nocturnal enemy movements, Anderson finally received grudging permission to establish an experimental training program at Camp Lejeune. The program would select qualified marksmen from the Montford Point Marines for advanced training in nighttime operations. Staff Sergeant Raymond Davis, a former hunting guide from Mississippi, became one of the program's first instructors. "These men come to us with natural advantages," Davis noted in his training journal. "Many grew up hunting at night out of necessity. They know how to move, how to listen, how to sense changes in their environment that others might miss. We're not teaching them new skills so much as honing abilities they already possess." The selection process was brutally difficult. From over 3,000 Montford Point Marines, only 87 made it through the initial screening. Of those, just 36 would complete the specialized 8-week training course. Marcus Jenkins, a 24-year-old former sharecropper from Georgia, emerged as one of the program's standouts. "Jenkins can distinguish between 7 different shades of darkness," wrote Lieutenant Samuel Cooper in his evaluation. "His ability to detect movement at night exceeds anything I've seen in 20 years of military service. If the Corps has any sense at all, they'll get this man and his colleagues into the field immediately." Production statistics supported the unit's potential effectiveness. Standard Marine Corps snipers averaged 65% accuracy at 200 yards during daylight conditions. Jenkins and his fellow night snipers maintained 78% accuracy at the same distance in near total darkness. They achieved this using the standard 1903 Springfield rifle with modified sights. Proving their value came not from special equipment, but from exceptional human capability. Despite these impressive results, the unit remained in training limbo for months. "The difficulty isn't their ability," Anderson confided to a colleague in February 1943. Its convincing command that African-American Marines should serve in forward combat positions at all, let alone in specialized roles. General Alexander Vandergrift, who had replaced Holcomb as Marine Commandant, reviewed the program in April 1943. His initial skepticism gave way to reluctant pragmatism as casualty reports from ongoing island campaigns continued to show vulnerability to nighttime operations. "If these men can reduce our losses as the data suggests," Vandergrift noted, "I would be remiss in my duty to keep them stateside regardless of other considerations." By this time, the unit had grown to 58 qualified snipers, divided into 4 operational sections. They had developed their own training methodologies, including exercises conducted during moonless nights in swamplands that closely approximated Pacific Island conditions. Their techniques incorporated elements of traditional hunting practices from various African-American communities across the South, knowledge that would never have entered military doctrine through conventional channels. Marcus Jenkins' section, designated Night Stalkers, received deployment orders in January 1944. Their destination, the Mariana Islands Campaign, specifically Saipan, a crucial Japanese stronghold that American planners considered essential for future air operations against the Japanese mainland. The 15 men would be attached to the 2nd Marine Division as a special operations unit, though their specific capabilities remained closely guarded information. Captain Thomas Harrison, the white officer assigned to command the unit, initially viewed his posting as a demotion. "I've been relegated to babysitting a social experiment," he wrote in a letter home that was later found among his personal effects. "One can only hope this misguided attempt at integration doesn't cost American lives." The journey to the Pacific Theater proved enlightening for Harrison. During the long transport voyage across the Pacific, he observed the night snipers' daily training regimen, which included sensory deprivation exercises to enhance hearing acuity and special eye conditioning protocols to improve night vision adaptation. The men maintained strict dietary restrictions, avoiding salt and consuming large quantities of vitamin A supplements, primarily liver and carrots, which their research suggested improved night vision capabilities. These men approached their specialized role with a professionalism that would shame many of our regular units, Harrison noted in his command journal by the time they reached Pearl Harbor. Their commitment borders on scientific in its precision and discipline. On June 15, 1944, American forces launched the invasion of Saipan. The initial landings met fierce resistance, with Japanese defenders inflicting heavy casualties on the beachheads. By day 3, the American advance had slowed considerably, with Japanese forces using the island's difficult terrain to launch effective counterattacks, particularly during nighttime hours. Colonel Robert Williams, commanding the 8th Marine Regiment, summoned Captain Harrison on the evening of June 18th. "Your unit has 48 hours to prove its worth," Williams stated bluntly. "The Japanese are infiltrating our lines every night, and we're losing good men. If your specialists can disrupt these night operations, they'll have earned their place. If not, they'll be reassigned to support duties where they belong." That night, Jenkins and 3 other snipers deployed along a ridgeline overlooking a valley where Japanese troops had been moving under cover of darkness. Their equipment was minimal: rifles, canteens, and small pouches of specially prepared rations. They wore no helmets, which they had determined created distinctive silhouettes and limited hearing. Instead, they covered their faces and hands with a mixture of mud and charcoal, rendering themselves nearly invisible in the darkness. By dawn, they had eliminated 17 Japanese infiltrators without firing a single shot, using only combat knives and garrotes to maintain complete silence. They also mapped previously unknown enemy positions, information that proved invaluable for artillery targeting later that day. Most importantly, they had prevented a planned night attack that intelligence later revealed would have targeted a vulnerable command post. Colonel Williams received their report with initial disbelief. "No unit could operate with that level of effectiveness under those conditions," he remarked to Harrison. But the night's results spoke for themselves. The bodies were recovered, the intelligence proven accurate, and the threatened sector had remained secure. "Deploy your full unit tonight," Williams ordered. "Same parameters, expanded sector. Let's see if this was luck or capability." For the next 2 nights, Jenkins and the Night Stalkers operated across a 2-mile front, disrupting Japanese night movements so effectively that enemy commanders began ordering their troops to remain in defensive positions after dark, a dramatic tactical advantage for American forces who had previously been ceding control of the battlefield during nighttime hours. A captured Japanese lieutenant, when interrogated about the sudden change in night operations, reportedly said, "We cannot move at night anymore. The Americans have deployed yokai, monsters that hunt in darkness. They make no sound. You see nothing until your men disappear." By June 25th, word of the night snipers' effectiveness had spread throughout the American command structure. Major General Thomas Watson, commanding the 2nd Marine Division, requested a full briefing on the unit's capabilities. After reviewing their operational results, he immediately authorized the expansion of their operational area to cover the entire division front. "These men have revolutionized our night defensive capabilities," Watson wrote in a dispatch to Pacific Fleet headquarters. "Their specialized skills have saved countless Marine lives and fundamentally altered the tactical equation on Saipan. I recommend immediate formation of additional units based on this model." For Marcus Jenkins and his fellow snipers, the official recognition meant little compared to the grudging respect they began receiving from fellow Marines. White Marines who wouldn't speak to us on the transport ship were now offering us their coffee rations and asking about our techniques, Jenkins later recalled in an oral history recorded in 1972. Nothing breaks down barriers like proving your worth in combat. By June 28th, Japanese forces on Saipan had been pushed back to the northern section of the island. Intelligence suggested they were preparing for a major counteroffensive, likely to begin with night infiltration to disrupt American positions before a larger dawn attack. General Holland Smith, overall commander of the operation, specifically requested the Night Stalkers be deployed to prevent such infiltration. That evening, Jenkins and his spotter, Private First Class William Morris, moved deep into contested territory, establishing an observation post in a small cave overlooking a Japanese assembly area. Their mission, not just to eliminate targets of opportunity, but to gather intelligence on enemy movements and disrupt command and control capabilities. As darkness fell completely, Jenkins observed through his scope as Japanese officers gathered around a crude table, apparently reviewing maps and planning the next day's operations. At 500 yards in near-total darkness, such a shot would be considered impossible by conventional standards. Jenkins controlled his breathing, made minute adjustments for the gentle cross breeze, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The Japanese officer collapsed instantly. Before his colleagues could react, Jenkins had chambered another round and eliminated a second officer. The remaining Japanese scattered in confusion, unaware of the shooter's position or distance, creating chaos that effectively disrupted the command structure for the planned counterattack. Throughout that night, Jenkins and Morris relocated 7 times, engaging targets across a 2-mile sector, creating the impression of a much larger force. By morning, they had eliminated 7 Japanese officers and 17 enlisted personnel, while providing intelligence that directly contributed to the success of American operations the following day. Captain Harrison, receiving their report at dawn, could only shake his head in amazement. "What you've accomplished shouldn't be possible," he told Jenkins. "The shots you're describing violate everything we teach about combat marksmanship." Jenkins simply replied, "With respect, sir, perhaps it's time to teach different things." The Japanese response to the night snipers proved their effectiveness. Captured documents later revealed that special alerts had been issued to all units on Saipan regarding special American night fighters. Japanese troops were ordered to remain in protected positions after dark, to eliminate all light sources, and to maintain complete silence, defensive measures that severely limited their operational capabilities. A Japanese colonel's diary, recovered after the battle, contained the following entry. "The Americans have deployed something new and terrifying, silent shadows that strike without warning. My men speak in whispers about dark demons hunting us at night. Morale is affected. We can no longer move or resupply under cover of darkness, which has always been our advantage. As American forces continued their advance across Saipan, the Night Stalkers expanded their operations. They began training regular Marine units in basic night movement techniques, helping to extend American operational capabilities around the clock. They also developed new tactics, including intentionally allowing themselves to be observed briefly at extreme distances, creating psychological terror among Japanese troops who began to believe the night itself had become their enemy. For the Night Stalkers, however, their success on Saipan represented something beyond military effectiveness. Private First Class Robert Johnson, the youngest member of the unit at just 19 years old, expressed this sentiment in a letter home. "We're proving something here that goes beyond the war itself. Every Japanese soldier we remove from the battlefield is another argument against the people who said we weren't fit for combat. Every time a white Marine nods respect in our direction, we're changing something fundamental about what it means to be an American soldier." But the unit's success also attracted unwanted attention. On July 2nd, a photographer from a military publicity unit attempted to document the Night Stalkers during their daytime rest period. Captain Harrison intervened, concerned about both operational security and potential backlash from stateside publications if images of African American Marines in elite combat roles circulated widely. "The work these men are doing is too important to be compromised by publicity, positive or negative," Harrison reported to Colonel Williams. "Their effectiveness partially depends on the enemy not understanding their methods or capabilities." Williams agreed, issuing strict orders that the unit's operations remain classified. This decision, while tactically sound, had the unfortunate effect of obscuring the Night Stalkers' contributions from official histories, one reason their story remained largely untold for decades after the war. By July 7th, Japanese forces on Saipan had been pushed to the northernmost tip of the island. Intelligence suggested they were preparing for a final desperate counterattack, a Gyokusai, or shattered jewel operation, where they would expend all remaining forces in a suicidal charge rather than surrender. General Holland Smith, anticipating this action, requested the Night Stalkers conduct deep infiltration behind Japanese lines to eliminate command elements and create confusion prior to the expected attack. It was their most dangerous assignment yet, requiring them to operate completely cut off from supporting forces for up to 48 hours in densely held enemy territory. Jenkins and 5 other snipers departed American lines shortly after sunset on July 7th, moving silently through terrain that Japanese commanders considered securely under their control. Their knowledge of night movement had become so refined that they passed within yards of enemy sentries without detection, systematically working their way toward the Japanese command center, identified by intelligence officers. By midnight, they had reached their objective, a small cluster of caves being used as the Japanese headquarters. Taking up positions on surrounding high ground, they prepared to implement a coordinated firing plan at dawn, when officers would emerge for daily briefings. What they witnessed that night, however, forced a change in plans. Through observation, they realized Japanese civilians, families including women and children, were present in the headquarters area. The Night Stalkers had been briefed about the possibility of civilian presence, but seeing the reality of the situation presented a moral dilemma their training hadn't prepared them for. Jenkins made the decision to modify their mission. Rather than firing on the headquarters at dawn, they would continue observation through the day, targeting only military personnel and carefully avoiding any action that might endanger civilians. This decision, while humane, significantly increased their risk by requiring them to remain in exposed positions during daylight hours. "We didn't come here to harm innocent people," Jenkins later explained. "No matter what the official orders said, we all understood there are lines you don't cross, even in war." Throughout July 8th, the Night Stalkers maintained their hidden positions, engaging selected military targets while documenting Japanese defensive preparations. The intelligence they gathered would prove crucial for American operations in the coming days. More importantly, their disciplined fire prevented Japanese commanders from implementing their planned final counteroffensive, as key officers were systematically removed before orders could be issued. Late that afternoon, Jenkins observed a disturbing development. Japanese soldiers began moving civilians toward the northern cliffs of the island. Through his scope, he could see fear in the civilians' expressions and the threatening manner of the soldiers escorting them. Jenkins sent Private Johnson crawling back through Japanese lines with this critical intelligence. A perilous journey that required navigating nearly a mile of enemy-held territory in broad daylight. Johnson completed this mission successfully, reaching American lines shortly after sunset, with information that likely saved hundreds of civilian lives. American commanders, alerted to the situation, adjusted artillery fire plans to avoid civilian concentrations and prepared humanitarian teams to assist civilians who might flee toward American lines. They also issued specific orders to all units to make every effort to prevent civilian casualties during the final phase of the campaign. For the remaining Night Stalkers, now reduced to 5 men, the night of July 8th became their most challenging operation. Japanese forces, increasingly desperate and aware that something was targeting their command structure, implemented aggressive patrols throughout their remaining territory. Twice, Jenkins and his men were nearly discovered, forced to remain motionless for hours as Japanese soldiers passed within inches of their positions. Their specialized training in controlling even involuntary bodily functions, breathing, blinking, sweat response, proved essential to their survival during these close encounters. By dawn on July 9th, the Night Stalkers had exhausted their ammunition and supplies, but had successfully prevented the planned Japanese counteroffensive from materializing. As American forces renewed their advance across the island, Jenkins and his remaining team began the dangerous process of infiltrating back through collapsing Japanese lines toward American positions. This return journey proved more hazardous than the initial infiltration. Japanese forces, now compressed into a smaller area, were densely positioned across their path. Additionally, American artillery and naval gunfire were actively targeting the same region, creating danger from friendly fire. Just past noon, the Night Stalkers encountered an unexpected situation. A group of approximately 30 Japanese civilians, including elderly people and children, hiding in a small ravine separated from both Japanese and American forces. They were clearly terrified, expecting to be killed by either side if discovered. Despite the risk to their mission, Jenkins made the decision to escort these civilians to American lines. Using hand gestures and limited Japanese phrases they had learned during their intelligence briefings, they managed to communicate their intentions to the civilian group. For the next 6 hours, the Night Stalkers guided these civilians through active battle zones, using their exceptional knowledge of terrain and movement to avoid detection by Japanese forces and identification as targets by American units. This humanitarian action, entirely outside their mission parameters, reflected the complex moral choices that often arise in combat situations. Late that evening, Jenkins and his team successfully brought all 30 civilians to an American aid station, where they received medical attention and food. Captain Harrison, receiving word of their arrival, immediately went to meet them. Finding Jenkins exhausted but uninjured, he simply said, "I should reprimand you for modifying your mission without authorization, Sergeant. Instead, I'm recommending you for the Silver Star." Jenkins looked at his commanding officer for a long moment before responding, "With respect, sir, we didn't do it for medals. We did it because it was right." As American forces completed the liberation of Saipan on July 9th, the contribution of the Night Stalkers had already altered tactical planning for future island operations. General Holland Smith specifically requested that similar units be deployed for the upcoming invasions of Tinian and Guam, stating in a classified memorandum, "The specialized night fighting capabilities demonstrated by these units have proven invaluable in reducing casualties and accelerating operational timetables. I consider their deployment essential for future amphibious operations in the Pacific Theater." For Marcus Jenkins and the other Night Stalkers, Saipan represented just the beginning of their war. They would go on to participate in operations across the Pacific, from Tinian to Iwo Jima, continuing to refine their unique capabilities. Their techniques would eventually be incorporated into standard Marine Corps training, though often without acknowledgement of their origins. Perhaps most significantly, their effectiveness helped change perceptions about African American combat capabilities within the military itself. Captain Harrison, who had initially viewed his assignment to the unit as a form of punishment, became one of their strongest advocates. In August 1944, he wrote to Marine Corps headquarters, "These men have demonstrated courage, discipline, and tactical innovation that represents the highest traditions of the Corps. Their specialized capabilities have saved countless American lives and contributed significantly to operational success. I strongly recommend expansion of this program and integration of these techniques into standard training protocols." Despite this recommendation, the Night Stalkers remained largely unknown to the American public during the war. Military censors, concerned about both security and potential racial controversies, kept their operations classified. Only decades later, through the declassification of operational reports and the recorded oral histories of participants, would their remarkable contribution begin to receive proper recognition. For the Japanese forces on Saipan, the psychological impact of the Night Stalkers' operations extended far beyond their direct military effectiveness. Interviews with Japanese prisoners captured during the campaign revealed a widespread belief that they had faced supernatural adversaries, spirits or demons that hunted exclusively at night and could see in total darkness. A Japanese sergeant, interrogated on July 10th, stated, "We were told Americans fear night fighting, that they cling to their positions after sunset. But these new ones, they are different. They move like shadows. They strike without sound. Many men believed they were not human at all, but monsters conjured by American shamans." This psychological dimension of the Night Stalkers' operations, the fear and uncertainty they created among enemy forces, multiplied their tactical effectiveness beyond their actual numbers. Japanese units, believing themselves hunted by supernatural forces, often refused to move or even maintain proper vigilance at night, significantly reducing their combat effectiveness. For Jenkins and his fellow Night Stalkers, this fear represented a grim irony. In America, these men had often been treated as less than fully human because of their race. In combat, their very humanity was questioned again, but this time through attribution of superhuman capabilities, a different kind of dehumanization, but dehumanization nonetheless. As Jenkins prepared his unit for redeployment to Tinian in mid-July, he reflected on this paradox in a conversation with Captain Harrison. "The Japanese think we're monsters because of what we can do in darkness," he observed. "Some of our own countrymen think we're something less than human because of our skin color. Neither sees us as simply men doing what men can do when properly trained and given the opportunity to serve." Harrison, who had undergone his own transformation through commanding the unit, nodded thoughtfully. "When this war is over, Sergeant, I hope your service changes things back home. But regardless of what happens, I want you to know this. You and your men have earned a place in Marine Corps history that no one can ever take away from you." For the Night Stalkers, their next mission awaited as American forces prepared for the invasion of Tinian, just 3 miles south of Saipan, but presenting entirely new challenges and opportunities for their specialized capabilities. Jenkins checked his equipment one final time, preparing for the intelligence briefing that would begin their next operation. The moonlight reflected off the waters of the Mariana Sea as Jenkins contemplated what lay ahead. The Night Stalkers had proven their value on Saipan, but the war was far from over. Many battles remained to be fought, many nights to move through darkness as both hunters and protectors. Whatever came next, they would face it together, a band of brothers forged in the crucible of combat, their bond transcending the racial divisions of their time. As dawn approached on July 15, 1944, final preparations for the Tinian operation commenced. Jenkins assembled his team for their pre-mission briefing, each man checking his specialized equipment with the precision born of experience and necessity. The Night Stalkers were ready for whatever challenges awaited them on the next island, ready to prove once again that in the darkness of war, it was not the color of their skin that mattered, but the courage in their hearts and the skill in their hands. July 24, 1944, Tinian Island, Mariana Archipelago. The Night Stalkers had been operating for 9 consecutive nights, moving silently through the dense jungle that covered the island's central highlands. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese forces had established a network of observation posts across this region, providing early warning of American movements and coordinating artillery fire against advancing Marine units. "They've adapted to our presence," Jenkins explained during the pre-mission briefing. "After Saipan, word spread. The Japanese command knows we're operating at night. They've implemented countermeasures, multiple sentries, challenge passwords changed hourly, reduced movement patterns. Our job just got considerably more difficult." Captain Harrison nodded grimly. The Night Stalker's previous success had created new challenges. The element of surprise, the psychological advantage of the unknown, had diminished. Now they would have to rely even more heavily on superior skill and disciplined execution. "Division Command needs those observation posts neutralized," Harrison stated. "The advance stalled yesterday when Japanese artillery bracketed our forward elements with uncanny accuracy. Those spotters are costing American lives. You have 48 hours to resolve the situation." Jenkins studied the terrain map, identifying likely observation positions based on elevation, fields of view, and concealment factors. Unlike Saipan, Tinian featured more varied topography, steep ridgelines alternating with flat agricultural fields formerly used for sugarcane production. This created both challenges and opportunities for night operations. "We'll deploy in 3-man teams," Jenkins decided. "Morris Johnson and I will take the northern sector. Davis, Washington, and Cooper will cover central. Richardson, Taylor, and Parker will handle the southern approach. Maintain radio silence except for emergency extraction. Standard recognition signals at rendezvous points." The men prepared methodically, applying the dark camouflage mixture to exposed skin, checking weapons with practiced precision. They had refined their equipment based on lessons from Saipan. Boots now featured special rubber soles fashioned from recovered Japanese tire material, softer and quieter than standard-issue footwear. Their uniforms had been modified with additional pockets positioned for silent access. Even their canteens had been wrapped in fabric to eliminate the possibility of metallic sounds. As darkness fell, the teams moved out separately, each taking different routes to their assigned sectors. Jenkins led his team through a shallow streambed, using the flowing water to mask their movement sounds and eliminate scent trails that might alert enemy sentries. The water was warm, barely reaching mid-calf, but moving through it required precise measured steps to prevent splashing. 400 yards into Japanese-controlled territory, Jenkins froze, raising his closed fist, the signal to halt immediately. Morris and Johnson became motionless, controlling their breathing as they had been trained. 30 seconds passed in complete silence before Jenkins slowly pointed to their left flank. A Japanese patrol was passing less than 20 yards away, 6 men moving in standard formation, maintaining proper intervals. Their discipline was impressive, each soldier scanning different sectors, maintaining noise discipline. These were experienced troops, veterans who had survived previous engagements, likely including Saipan, where they would have learned about the night hunters. Jenkins and his team remained perfectly still, becoming part of the landscape rather than trying to hide within it. The distinction was subtle but critical. Hiding created tension, generated minute movements, produced the almost imperceptible sounds that experienced soldiers might detect. Instead, the Night Stalkers practiced what Jenkins called environmental integration, a state of complete physical and mental stillness that rendered them effectively invisible, even at close range. The patrol passed without incident, continuing along their predetermined route. Jenkins waited 5 full minutes after they disappeared from view before signaling his team to resume movement. They adjusted their course slightly, now aware of Japanese patrol patterns in this sector. By midnight, they had reached their first observation point, a ridgeline overlooking a valley where American forces were expected to advance within the next 72 hours. Through his specialized night optics, Jenkins identified a carefully concealed Japanese position, a forward observation post disguised beneath natural foliage and local materials. 2 Japanese soldiers manned the position, one monitoring an artillery coordination map, while the other scanned the valley through field glasses. Both wore communication headsets connected to a field telephone that would relay targeting coordinates to artillery positions farther inland. They had positioned themselves expertly, with clear fields of view, while remaining nearly invisible from ground level. Jenkins studied the situation carefully. Direct engagement risked alerting other nearby positions. The Night Stalker's mission was not merely to eliminate individual observation posts, but to neutralize the entire network without alerting Japanese command to the operation. This required patience and precise timing. "We observe until dawn," Jenkins whispered to his teammates. "Document positions, rotation schedules, communication protocols. We'll coordinate with the other teams before taking action." Throughout that night, Jenkins' team identified 3 separate observation posts in their sector, each positioned to provide overlapping fields of view across likely American approach routes. The Japanese had established a sophisticated observation network, demonstrating the tactical adaptability that made them formidable opponents despite diminishing resources. At dawn, the Night Stalkers withdrew to their designated rendezvous point, a small cave system 200 yards inside American-controlled territory. The 3 teams shared information, creating a comprehensive map of the Japanese observation network across Tinian's Central Highlands. 19 observation posts total, Jenkins summarized for Captain Harrison. 3 main clusters with dedicated communication links to artillery positions here, here, and here. He indicated the locations on their field map. They've established redundancy. If one post is compromised, others maintain coverage of the same sectors. Taking them individually won't solve the problem. Harrison studied the map thoughtfully. "Recommendations, Sergeant?" Jenkins outlined his plan, a coordinated operation targeting not the observation posts themselves, but the communication hubs connecting them to artillery units. They've distributed their observers, but centralized their communications. Take out these 3 relay stations simultaneously, and the entire network becomes blind and mute. The strategy was approved. That night, all 3 Night Stalker teams deployed with specific objectives, each targeting one of the communication relay stations identified during their reconnaissance. These were more heavily defended than the observation posts themselves, typically with 4 to 6 soldiers, and often located in cave entrances or reinforced positions. Jenkins' team approached their target shortly after midnight, a small concrete bunker built into a natural depression, concealed by camouflage netting and surrounded by carefully positioned defensive positions. 2 sentries patrolled the perimeter, while 4 signal operators worked inside, coordinating information from multiple observation posts. The standard approach would involve eliminating the sentries quietly before addressing the personnel inside. Jenkins, however, had developed a different technique. Japanese defenders expected precisely this conventional sequence and had positioned their sentries accordingly, with overlapping fields of view specifically designed to prevent such infiltration. Instead, Jenkins implemented what the Night Stalkers called a ghost insertion, bypassing the perimeter entirely by identifying and exploiting a conceptual gap in the defensive design. In this case, a drainage channel running beneath the bunker provided access to the facility itself while leaving the perimeter security intact. Moving with extraordinary patience, Jenkins navigated the narrow drainage passage, a journey of nearly 40 minutes to cover just 20 yards. The channel, barely 18 inches in diameter, would have been considered impassable by conventional military standards. Jenkins' specialized training in confined space movement, developed specifically for Pacific operations, allowed him to traverse it silently despite the extremely restricted space. Emerging inside the bunker's lower level, Jenkins found himself in a small maintenance area directly beneath the communication center. Through a metal grate in the ceiling, he could observe the Japanese operators at their equipment, 4 men coordinating information from 7 different observation posts, translating visual reports into artillery coordinates. Rather than engaging the operators directly, Jenkins focused on the equipment itself. From his position, he could access the communication system's power supply and signal distribution panel. Using specialized tools developed by Marine Corps engineers, he implemented a technical, rather than tactical solution, modifying the equipment to introduce subtle but critical errors into the transmitted coordinates. This approach achieved multiple objectives simultaneously. First, it would cause Japanese artillery fire to consistently miss American forces by several hundred yards. rendering it ineffective without alerting Japanese command that their system had been compromised. Second, it preserved the appearance of normal operations, preventing the implementation of backup systems. Finally, it created a false sense of security among Japanese forces that would influence their tactical decisions over the coming days. The entire operation took less than 15 minutes. Jenkins extracted through the same drainage channel, rejoining his team at their predetermined rendezvous point. By dawn, all 3 Night Stalker teams had successfully completed similar operations at their assigned targets, effectively neutralizing the entire Japanese observation network across central Tinian without firing a single shot. The impact became apparent the following day as American forces resumed their advance. Japanese artillery, receiving flawed coordinates from their observation network, consistently missed their targets by significant margins. After several hours of ineffective fire, Japanese commanders ordered a reduction in artillery expenditure, preserving limited ammunition supplies but further reducing their defensive capability. Major General Clifton Cates, commanding the 4th Marine Division on Tinian, specifically noted this development in his operational summary. Enemy artillery effectiveness has decreased dramatically in the past 24 hours. Fire missions that previously demonstrated precise targeting now consistently fall wide of advancing units. This unexpected development has significantly reduced casualties and accelerated our advance timetable. For the Night Stalkers, however, the operation represented only half their mission objective. Intelligence indicated that Japanese forces were preparing fallback positions in Tinian's mountainous northern region, an area locals called the Devil's Cathedral, due to its forbidding terrain and unusual rock formations. If these positions became operational, they could delay the American advance for weeks, potentially costing thousands of additional casualties. Captain Harrison presented the intelligence during that evening's briefing. Japanese engineers are establishing interconnected defensive positions throughout this region, he explained, indicating the northern mountains on their operational map. Once completed, these fortifications would be nearly impossible to reduce without massive artillery preparation or aerial bombardment, neither of which is viable given the terrain. We need detailed reconnaissance of the construction progress and, if possible, measures to delay completion. Jenkins studied the map carefully. The mountainous region presented extreme challenges for night movement, sheer cliff faces, narrow ravines, and minimal vegetation cover. This isn't jungle or urban terrain, he observed. Our standard techniques won't be as effective here. We'll need to adapt our approach. The solution came from an unexpected source. Private First Class William Morris, the team's youngest member, had grown up in the mountains of western North Carolina. Before the war, he had worked with his father as a rock climber and guide for wealthy tourists visiting the region's dramatic cliffs and caves. The Japanese will expect approaches along established paths and ravines, Morris explained. They won't secure the cliff faces themselves because they'll consider them impassable, especially at night. But with proper techniques, we can move vertically through their defensive positions. Over the next 24 hours, Morris trained the Night Stalkers in basic climbing techniques adapted for nighttime operations. Using equipment scavenged from Marine Corps engineering units and modified for silent operation, they practiced on similar terrain behind American lines, developing protocols for vertical movement in complete darkness. On the night of July 27th, the Night Stalkers deployed to the northern mountains, moving in 2 5-man teams to provide mutual support. Jenkins led the primary reconnaissance element, while Staff Sergeant Raymond Davis commanded the security team. Their objective: complete mapping of Japanese defensive preparations while identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited by conventional forces. The approach took over 4 hours, a grueling journey across increasingly difficult terrain. As they neared the Japanese positions, Morris took the lead, guiding them up a near-vertical cliff face that bypassed enemy sentries positioned along more accessible routes. The climb required precise coordination, with each man following exactly in the footsteps of the one before him, maintaining physical contact in the darkness to prevent separation. Reaching a natural ledge approximately 300 feet above the valley floor, Jenkins established an observation position, overlooking the primary Japanese construction site. Through specialized night optics, he could observe hundreds of Japanese soldiers and Korean laborers working under floodlights, excavating defensive positions, and constructing interconnected bunkers throughout the mountainside. "They're building something far more substantial than we anticipated," Jenkins whispered to Davis. "This isn't just a defensive position. It's an underground fortress, multiple levels, hardened command centers, protected artillery positions. If they complete this complex, it could hold out for months against conventional attacks." For the next 6 hours, the Night Stalkers conducted detailed reconnaissance, mapping construction patterns and identifying key structural elements. They observed that the Japanese were implementing an intricate water management system, a network of cisterns and channels designed to collect and store rainwater, allowing the position to remain operational even under prolonged isolation. This water system, however, also represented a potential vulnerability. The entire complex depended on a primary reservoir being constructed near the summit, with distribution channels feeding lower positions. Jenkins recognized that disrupting this water system would render the entire defensive network significantly less effective without requiring direct assault on the fortified positions themselves. Shortly before dawn, as Japanese work crews began rotating shifts, Jenkins identified an opportunity. The primary reservoir remained unguarded during the brief transition period between night and day shifts, approximately 12 minutes when supervision of the construction site diminished. During this window, Morris and Jenkins descended to the reservoir construction site while the remainder of the team maintained observation positions. Rather than attempting to damage the completed portions of the reservoir, which would be immediately detected and repaired, Jenkins implemented a more subtle approach. Using technical knowledge gained from his pre-war experience in construction, he modified the reservoir's drainage system, introducing flaws that would cause the structure to fail gradually once filled with water. "They won't detect these modifications during construction," Jenkins explained afterward. "The reservoir will appear functional during initial testing. The structural weaknesses will only become apparent under sustained usage, likely after Japanese forces have committed to defending these positions." The sabotage complete, Jenkins and Morris rejoined their team for the extraction journey. Dawn was approaching as they began their descent from the mountain, using a different route to avoid Japanese patrols that would be establishing day positions along the main approaches. The return journey proved more challenging than the infiltration. Daylight increased the risk of detection, forcing the Night Stalkers to move more slowly and utilize smaller natural features for concealment. What should have been a 3-hour extraction extended to nearly 7 hours of painstaking movement, often requiring them to remain motionless for extended periods as Japanese patrols passed nearby. By mid-afternoon, the Night Stalkers had successfully returned to American lines, bringing with them comprehensive intelligence about Japanese defensive preparations in the northern mountains. More importantly, they had implemented measures that would significantly degrade the effectiveness of those defenses without alerting Japanese commanders to the compromise. Colonel Robert Hogaboom, operations officer for the 2nd Division, received their report with keen interest. "This intelligence changes our approach to the northern sector entirely," he noted after reviewing their findings. "Rather than committing to a frontal assault on these positions, we can implement a containment strategy while focusing our primary effort elsewhere. The Japanese have invested substantial resources in these defenses, resources now effectively wasted." The impact of the Night Stalkers operation became apparent over the following week, as American forces systematically reduced Japanese resistance across Tinian. The compromised communication network prevented effective coordination of defensive operations, while Japanese commanders continued diverting precious resources to the northern mountain complex, unaware that its effectiveness had been fundamentally compromised. By August 1st, American forces had secured most of Tinian, with remaining Japanese defenders isolated in increasingly restricted pockets. The northern mountain complex, which Japanese commanders had intended as their final defensive stronghold, proved less effective than anticipated. When American forces eventually moved against these positions, they discovered that water management systems had failed catastrophically, forcing defenders to abandon key positions due to unsustainable conditions rather than direct military pressure. Major General Clifton Cates specifically credited specialized reconnaissance elements, a deliberately vague reference to the Night Stalkers, in his official report on the Tinian operation. The success of our advance, particularly in the difficult northern sector, owes much to the extraordinary intelligence provided by our specialized reconnaissance units. Their ability to operate in challenging terrain and provide actionable information about enemy dispositions and vulnerabilities significantly reduced casualties and accelerated the successful conclusion of operations on this island. For Jenkins and the Night Stalkers, the successful conclusion of operations on Tinian represented a significant evolution in their capabilities. They had moved beyond their original role as specialized snipers to become a comprehensive special operations unit, capable of complex reconnaissance, sabotage, and technical intelligence gathering. This expansion of capabilities would prove increasingly valuable as American forces continued their advance toward the Japanese home islands. The unit's reputation spread throughout the Pacific Theater, creating both operational advantages and new challenges. Japanese forces implemented increasingly elaborate countermeasures against night operations, including specialized training for their own soldiers in night detection techniques and the deployment of dedicated hunter teams tasked with locating and eliminating the Night Stalkers. These Japanese countermeasures achieved limited success. During operations on Peleliu in September 1944, two Night Stalkers, Privates Robert Johnson and James Washington, were located and engaged by a Japanese hunter team specifically trained to counter their techniques. Both Marines sustained injuries, but managed to evade capture and return to American lines with valuable intelligence about these new Japanese tactics. In response, Jenkins and Captain Harrison continued evolving their operational methods, implementing what they called adaptive irregularity, deliberately changing techniques and patterns between operations to prevent Japanese forces from identifying consistent behaviors that could be countered. This approach required extraordinary flexibility and innovation from unit members who needed to constantly develop and master new skills rather than relying on established protocols. By late 1944, the Night Stalkers had expanded to 3 full platoons totaling 48 Marines, all drawn from the Montford Point Marines and specially selected for their aptitude in night operations. The unit established its own training facility on Guam, where new members underwent an intensive 8-week qualification course before joining operational teams. The training curriculum, developed primarily by Jenkins and other original unit members, incorporated lessons learned from each operation, creating an evolving body of specialized knowledge. Captain Thomas Harrison, in a report to Marine Corps Headquarters, dated November 12, 1944, outlined the unit's significance beyond its immediate tactical contributions. The success of these specialized operators demonstrates the value of identifying and developing natural aptitudes among personnel who might otherwise be relegated to support functions. Their effectiveness suggests potential applications for similar specialized units across other operational domains, possibly including amphibious reconnaissance, mountain warfare, and urban combat operations. This perspective represented a remarkable evolution in Harrison's thinking. From his initial skepticism about commanding African American Marines in combat roles, he had become not only an advocate for their specific unit, but a proponent for broader reconsideration of racial policies throughout the military. This transformation, replicated among many officers who worked directly with the Night Stalkers, would contribute to the eventual desegregation of the armed forces after the war. For Marcus Jenkins, however, the unit's significance extended beyond both its tactical effectiveness and its implications for racial progress. In December 1944, as the Night Stalkers prepared for potential deployment to Iwo Jima, he articulated this broader perspective during a training session with new unit members. "What we're developing here isn't just a set of tactical techniques," he explained to the assembled Marines. "It's a fundamentally different approach to warfare itself. Traditional military thinking emphasizes mass, firepower, and direct confrontation. We've demonstrated that small units with specialized capabilities can achieve strategic effects through precision, intelligence, and indirect action. That concept will outlast this war and influence military operations for generations to come. This assessment proved prescient. Although the Night Stalkers' operations remained classified for decades after the war, their methodologies and approach eventually formed the foundation for post-war special operations capabilities throughout the American military. The unit's emphasis on specialized selection, innovative training, technical intelligence gathering, and unconventional problem-solving would become defining characteristics of elite units established years later. As 1944 drew to a close, the Night Stalkers faced their most significant challenge yet. Intelligence indicated that Japanese forces were establishing elaborate defensive preparations throughout the home islands, including specialized countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize American night operations. These preparations included acoustic detection systems, infrared monitoring equipment transferred from German technical advisors, and dedicated counter-infiltration units composed of Japan's most experienced jungle warfare veterans. Jenkins and Harrison spent weeks analyzing these developments, identifying potential vulnerabilities and developing countermeasures of their own. The technological race between specialized American units and Japanese defensive planners had entered a new phase, one that would require even greater innovation and adaptation from the Night Stalkers. On January 15, 1945, as American forces prepared for operations against Iwo Jima, the Night Stalkers received new deployment orders. Their assignment: conduct preliminary reconnaissance of Japanese defensive positions on the island, focusing particularly on the elaborate tunnel networks intelligence suggested had been constructed throughout the volcanic terrain. The mission would require insertion from submarine, a technique the unit had practiced but never implemented operationally. It would also require extended operation behind enemy lines, potentially up to 2 weeks without support or extraction capability. The risks were extraordinary, but so was the potential value of the intelligence they might gather. As the unit prepared for this new challenge, Jenkins found himself reflecting on their journey from Saipan to the present moment. What had begun as an experimental deployment of African-American Marines in a specialized combat role had evolved into something far more significant, both militarily and culturally. "We started with something to prove," he remarked to Captain Harrison during mission preparations. "Now we've proven so much that they're building entire defensive systems just to counter our operations. That's a kind of respect I never expected to encounter in this war." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "What happens after the war, Sergeant? Do we go back to the world as it was, or has something fundamental changed?" Jenkins considered this question carefully before responding. "The world we return to will look much like the one we left, at least initially. But beneath the surface, things have shifted, not just for us, but for everyone who served alongside us. People who never imagined African Americans could excel in specialized military roles have seen the evidence firsthand. That knowledge doesn't disappear when the fighting stops." The submarine USS Spearfish departed Pearl Harbor on February 3, 1945, carrying Jenkins and 11 other Night Stalkers toward Iwo Jima. Their mission represented the culmination of everything they had developed since their initial deployment on Saipan: specialized skills, innovative techniques, and unorthodox problem-solving approaches that had repeatedly proven their value across the Pacific campaign. As the submarine slipped beneath the waves, Jenkins reviewed their operational plans one final time. The mission ahead would test the limits of their capabilities in entirely new ways. Yet he felt a quiet confidence, not just in their preparation, but in the journey that had brought them to this moment. The Night Stalkers had begun as an experimental unit, marginalized within their own military by racial prejudice and institutional skepticism. Through discipline, innovation, and extraordinary effectiveness, they had transformed themselves into one of the most valued special operations capabilities in the Pacific theater. Their journey represented both a military achievement and a human statement, a demonstration of what becomes possible when artificial limitations are removed and human potential is allowed to flourish. On February 7, 1945, under the cover of absolute darkness, the Night Stalkers slipped into the waters off Iwo Jima's eastern shore. Swimming silently toward an island bristling with Japanese defenses, they carried with them not just their specialized equipment, but the legacy of everything they had accomplished since that first night on Saipan. Whatever challenges awaited them on this volcanic island, they would face them as they had faced all previous obstacles, with discipline, innovation, and the quiet confidence born of proven capability. The operation on Iwo Jima would remain classified for decades, its details only gradually emerging through declassified documents and the recorded testimonies of participants. What is known with certainty is that the intelligence gathered by the Night Stalkers directly influenced the operational planning for what would become one of the most challenging and costly battles of the Pacific Campaign. After the war, the Night Stalkers' legacy continued in complex and sometimes contradictory ways. The unit itself was disbanded during post-war demobilization, its personnel returning to civilian life with little public recognition of their extraordinary service. The specialized knowledge they had developed was preserved in classified training manuals and operational reports, eventually informing the development of post-war special operations capabilities without acknowledgement of its origins. Marcus Jenkins returned to Georgia, using his veterans' benefits to attend college and eventually become an engineer. In 1962, nearly 2 decades after his service with the Night Stalkers, he was contacted by Marine Corps historians researching specialized operations in the Pacific Theater. His detailed accounts, along with those of other unit members, began the slow process of incorporating their contributions into official military history. Captain Thomas Harrison remained in the Marine Corps after the war, eventually reaching the rank of colonel. Throughout his career, he advocated for both racial integration of the military and the development of specialized operational capabilities. In 1969, shortly before his retirement, he submitted a comprehensive report on the Night Stalkers' operations, ensuring their achievements would be preserved in military archives. In 1998, a memorial was finally dedicated at the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, specifically honoring the contributions of the Night Stalkers and other African American units that served with distinction despite the barriers of segregation and prejudice. The memorial includes Jenkins' simple but profound statement, "We served as Marines first, proving through action what words alone could never convey." Perhaps the most significant legacy of the Night Stalkers, however, emerged not through memorials or historical recognition, but through the transformation of American military capabilities. Their innovations in special operations, reconnaissance techniques, and unconventional warfare methodology eventually became standard elements of elite unit training throughout the armed forces. When American special operations units deployed to later conflicts, from Korea to Vietnam to more recent operations, they utilized techniques and approaches pioneered by Jenkins and his colleagues in the jungles and mountains of the Pacific Islands. Though the connection was rarely acknowledged, the lineage remained clear to those familiar with the classified operational history. In 2011, the last surviving member of the original Night Stalkers, William Morris, participated in a training seminar for Marine Corps scout snipers at Quantico, Virginia. At 95 years old, Morris observed young Marines practicing night movement techniques, remarkably similar to those his unit had developed nearly 7 decades earlier. When asked by a young lieutenant if he was proud to see his unit's methods still in use, Morris responded with characteristic humility, "We just did what needed doing with the abilities we had." Seems natural that good ideas would stick around, no matter where they came from originally. This perspective, that effectiveness transcends prejudice, that capability eventually overcomes preconception, perhaps best summarizes the enduring significance of the Night Stalkers. In the crucible of combat, facing an enemy who initially dismissed them as inferior based on preconceptions, they demonstrated through consistent excellence that human capability knows no racial boundaries. The Japanese forces who faced them in the darkness of Pacific nights learned this lesson through direct experience, coming to fear and respect adversaries they never clearly saw. American military leaders learned it through operational results that could not be dismissed or minimized. and history, though slow to acknowledge their contribution, eventually incorporated their achievement into the broader narrative of how the Pacific War was won. For Marcus Jenkins and his fellow Night Stalkers, their service represented both a military contribution and a human statement. They had proven through disciplined excellence rather than protest or proclamation that artificial limitations based on race represented not just a moral failure, but a practical one, denying the nation the full measure of capability from all its citizens. In that sense, their legacy extends beyond military history into American social evolution. They stand among the many examples of African American service members whose excellence helped undermine the foundations of segregation, contributing to its eventual dismantling in both military and civilian contexts. The night operations they conducted across the Pacific Islands, moving silently through darkness that others found impenetrable, achieving objectives that conventional wisdom considered impossible, serve as both historical reality and powerful metaphor. In darkness that might have concealed them, they instead found opportunity to demonstrate exceptional capability. In conditions that might have limited them, they discovered paths to unprecedented achievement. As dawn broke over the Pacific on August 15, 1945, with news of Japanese surrender spreading throughout Allied forces, Marcus Jenkins stood on the deck of a transport ship anchored off Okinawa. The war that had taken him from Georgia to the far reaches of the Pacific was finally ending. Around him, Marines celebrated with unrestrained joy, firing flares into the brightening sky, embracing comrades, allowing themselves to imagine homecoming after years of brutal conflict. Jenkins felt that joy as well, but tempered with reflection on all that had transpired since that first night on Saipan. The Night Stalkers had participated in 7 major island campaigns, conducting over 100 specialized operations behind Japanese lines. They had lost 8 men, each one a friend whose memory Jenkins carried daily. They had transformed from an experimental unit into one of the most effective special operations capabilities in the Pacific Theater. "What happens next, Sarge?" asked Private Robert Taylor, one of the younger Night Stalkers who had joined the unit after Tinian. "When we go home, do we just go back to how things were before?" Jenkins considered the question carefully before responding. "Nothing ever goes back exactly to how it was before, Taylor. The world changes. People change. We've changed. What matters is carrying forward what we've learned here. Not just the tactical skills, but the knowledge of what we're capable of when given the opportunity. That's something no one can ever take away from us." And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.